Here we go. Are you ready? Am I ready? Probably not, but I'll try. So I'm going to try to finally get out. This would be part 5, I believe, of the Towards Christ model. A answer to God's hiddenness. Whether God is metaphorical or not, you still need an answer to that question. Last episode, I began to answer this question with Genesis. And so the point of the Genesis story is that mankind went from God not being hidden to God being hidden. Why? Because we were, if you will, kicked out of relationship with Him. But that is probably not going to be 100% satisfying to everyone. It is a kind of answer. I mean, yes, that's why God is invisible. We've been kicked out of heaven, if you will, out of the Garden of Eden, where everything was taken care of for us. And therefore, life sucks, and we now live under curse, and we all die now, and we all suffer, and we all have to figure things out for ourselves. But I think there's another reason, and it has to also do with the Garden of Eden story, and aligns pretty well with Jordan Peterson's interpretation of the story, which is that this is the story of mankind coming to self-awareness. When you begin to judge good and evil for yourself instead of letting God do it or your instincts do it, then you will start, that's kind of the start of modeling our world and our experience of life and what we want out of life. And it's the start of modeling things that are not good, right? That are evil. So that's why that was the only evil. The only evil that there could be was to reject one's relationship with God, which is what the fall of mankind was. And now all other evils open up. But what also opens up is the ability to slowly evolve spiritually, psychologically, collectively, individually, all of that. Whereas, so far as I can tell, if mankind had never fallen, we would have been something like toddlers or children. I suppose obedient ones, because we weren't, kids. We were adults, so we had a model of reality and some sort of social mechanisms in place. But once the fall happened, humanity. What am I saying? Okay, of course a lot of people are going to disagree with that, so I've got to stop and back up. What do I mean by we were adults? Well, in the story, right? In the symbolic order of the story, we were adults. And so the idea is that maturity, but without something like, not exactly individuality, but without self-consciousness, I guess. Maturity without self-consciousness. So animals, very advanced animals perhaps. And one of the reasons there's kind of a idealism at times of nature and animals is because they don't have the ego, the self-aware ego, that's necessary to really screw things up. Now, of course, some animals do when they have been in contact with scumbag humans, right? Things like that do happen sometimes. Or you see something like a human nature in animals that have been raised by humans. Certainly you don't see animals behave like that in the wild. But anyway, I don't know why I'm getting into all that. That's all speculative, and it doesn't matter. It's not a part of my argument. All right. To continue. Freedom! As William Wallace, there we go, would shout. That's what self-awareness does. I would argue whether you have, as long as you don't have a simplistic deterministic model, as long as it is a systemic complex model of determinism that realizes that properties are emergent, and that a system could be so advanced that it can predict itself and then change that prediction, remodel the prediction, saying, I would normally do X. All my instincts, all my pre-programming says X, but I am stepping back and I'm saying I want to do Y. Now, of course, the determinist will say, and because you did it, it was determined. But that's silly. It really is. I don't know how else to describe it. I mean, yes, you can look at it that way. I realize that. It makes a lot of sense, right? Oh, wow, we must be determined, because whatever we do, you can always say, oh, see, you are determined. But the fact is, I'm the person who made the decision, right? Not the universe. I mean, I'm a part of the universe, but I'm the node in the network of the universe that had the capacity to do that. Therefore, I'm the one that did it. That's the emergent property of my thinking, right? That's not how determinism seems to assume that prior causes are what cause current states. But there is the cause of the system that is me, right? I'm the cause of my actions. And so long as I am the system that causes my actions, then it is not prior states that force my system to behave as it does. It is the system itself. Is it in relationship to the system outside of myself? Absolutely, of course. But are those influences, or are they direct one-to-one ratio effects? And so far as I can tell, they are merely influences that influence the calculation that I am making. Is it the conscious self, or is it the entire self, including the unconscious? Of course it is the entire self, including the unconscious. That is why we need to self-actualize and self-explore and understand ourselves and uncover the shadow and integrate it so that we can be a full self, can be more as fully aware of ourselves as possible, and can guide ourselves towards the most ideal state that we can possibly achieve as an individual. And of course, hopefully with the help of others, because it is both the individual and the group that allows maximal individuation to happen. Okay, what does all that have to do with God and the Genesis story, right? The reason that has to do with anything is that the symbolic structure of Christianity, regardless of whether Christ is God incarnate, raised from the dead, that symbolic structure values the capacity to choose, and the capacity to choose to submit oneself to the embodied principle of the highest good, which is what I would argue Christ is. Highest possible human good. And of course I'll have to do an episode explaining why I think Christianity does that. It's fine. You'll have to be patient with me though. So, okay, how do we keep going? Why is God invisible? To respect that freedom. In other words, how do I say this? Let's say our psychological mechanisms were capable of giving us visions of God all the time. So that's premise one. Premise two, actually parallel premise. These are both premises one following two different arguments. Premise two is, let's say God exists and could appear, if he wishes to, in front of everybody at any moment. So, two arguments. One, a psychological event. Number two, an actual event of a real God. But both don't happen, right? Or at least not very often. Not too many people get visions of God. Okay, why? Why is it such a rare occurrence? Why doesn't this happen all the time if, in fact, this is the best story we have, and there's Christians all over the world that are dedicated to God to some degree, right? The answer I would propose is that within the symbolic structure of Christianity itself is a respect for the individual and the individual's struggle to become itself, something like that, right? To transcend the self by orienting to Christ, but in a strange paradox, which Christ is full of paradox. He embodies so many paradoxes, but they are life-giving paradoxes. They are the reversal of the order of self-destruction that we were under into an order of life-giving. but we do that by orienting ourselves, dying to the self, orienting ourselves towards Christ. And if you had a certainty of God's existence via a vision or an appearance in the sky or something, Jesus on your cracker, I guess that works for some people, but for most people, it's like, wow, look, my cracker looks like Jesus. Okay. I don't know if anybody actually truly gets excited over their cracker looking like Jesus. I don't know. That seems unreasonable. But if they do, if that's good enough for them, that's in effect faith, right? It's a weird kind of faith. I hope they grow past that level of faith, but it still means something like they have committed to this symbolic structure and they are waiting for a sign, although I think that's the wrong way to look at Christianity. I don't think following Christ is waiting for Christ to give you a sign. In fact, I think Christ is pretty clear about that blessed are those who believe without seeing a sign, right? That's because that's not the freaking point of the story, right? Certainty is not the point of the Christian story. It is trusting in the symbolic structure. It is orienting yourself to Christ and orienting yourself in the most loving way possible, which is to say forgiveness, right? And grace. Can you do that all the time, in all ways, in every situation? No, of course not. There's still social order and stuff like that. But it is the effort to bring Christ into every situation, to bring that window of opportunity for love to blossom, for individuals who are damning themselves to bring themselves to life instead. That is the symbolic structure that Christianity is offering. I keep saying Christianity, and I don't actually want to be saying Christianity, that Christ is offering. So, because the Towards Christ model is not exactly about becoming a Christian. And that might dismay some of my listeners if anyone ever listens to this. But I do think it's a goal it's a way towards a ideal Christianity, right? I don't remember if this got in my other recordings, but Christianity has been is such a loaded term. There are so many meanings because there's been so many versions of Christianity and so many attempts to be Christian. And the point of Towards Christ, of this model, is to say, orient yourself towards Christ. Learn from every discipline and philosophy and theology that you can what seems useful, if you want to. But the primary thing is to behave like Jesus, to learn from Jesus and to behave like Jesus. Okay. All of that, I would say, would not function correctly if we were having visions of God all the time, or psychologically, or if we were seeing God miraculously change our life all the time. Because that is not, that. If God respects freedom, if God respects the individual, then God has to respect the mess we make of our lives and the mess we make of other people's lives. As horrible as that may sound, there's a sense in which none of that matters in the face of this grace that God is offering. That probably sounds bizarre to anyone who can imagine the kinds of suffering people can endure and have. I've experienced minutiae of suffering, right? Like junior high was an absolute disaster for me. My dad died at that time. My parents divorced when I was 5. I became addicted to pornography around that time and hated myself for it. I thought I was a disgusting human being, but I couldn't stop doing it. I could add, I've been a lonely person most of my life because I'm an introvert and I don't understand people. I've had several broken bones. I might have celiac disease. Certainly I'm gluten intolerant. And I've suffered for about 6 years before I figured that out. I've had restless leg syndrome that feels like an electric current shocking my leg. I personally rank it on a level of 8 on the pain scale because of the psychological frustration of having that zap come when you never know while you're trying to sleep, and knowing that if you don't get enough sleep, you're going to be a scumbag the next day because you won't be able to control your temper, etc., etc. I've had some crappy crap. That's all I'm trying to say. Do I see it as God's job to heal that? Or if things were worse, would I feel, oh God, one of my biggest nightmares is to see my family tortured and murdered, right? And it's one of those stupid things you get in your head sometimes. What if this happened? And it's like, why are you thinking about that, Matthew? Maybe I'm preparing myself for the worst. I don't know, because I've had a lot of crappy stuff happen, and I don't believe God would necessarily stop that from happening, whether he's a psychological event or a true event, right? Both arguments. And the reason is not because he's not loving, but because his love transcends death, right? It transcends the suffering we have. That's what I think the story of Christianity is about. How do I describe that? Well, how can I justify that statement? You know what? I'm going to try a different time. Because I want to think about that more, because it is a very valid argument. Someone is very validated in saying, how can you possibly believe that a loving God is justified in letting the most horrible things one can imagine happen to a person? And then, of course, there's a whole issue of hell that we'll have to deal with as well. But all right, that's a fairly decent first run at this, answering this solution, I think, or this problem of God's invisibleness. Hopefully that's at least somewhat satisfactory. Hopefully that at least moves the ball into the next game, right? Moves on to the next topic that has to be issued, that has to be dealt with in order to answer that issue. Okay, thank you very much.